I think we're live now. Hey, welcome everybody. So glad that you're here. We're just waiting for Chris Santacroce to log in. You're here at paraglidingtalk.com. We have Nick Hawks with us, Phil Russman, instructor, pilot, uh, cross country, and my instructor for the most part. Been a great friend, and so if you're just logging in or if you're just checking out the video, um, yeah, we're starting the stream now. But Phil just said he was going to share us a story about Bill Belcourt, so I want to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, Bill Belcourt, Salt Lake City, fantastic comp pilot, cross-country pilot, mentor, article writer. I had the pleasure and honor of flying with him across the Uintas, which is one of the few east-west mountain ranges this late summer. And me and a bunch of guys flew about 100 miles, and Bill kept going. We were pretty deep, and we maxed out at 18,000 feet. Some of us, like me, ran out of oxygen. Anyway, and that was why I quit at about 100 miles. But Bill kept going until basically sunset. In fact, he probably landed after sunset, but anyway, it was at least at sunset. And so we drove for hours and hours to go and retrieve him and pick him up. And one of the retrieve driver who was new, it was her first retrieve. We were, driving back out of the middle of nowhere, and we were all kind of quiet and said, "So, Bill, how's it feel to have flown so far and everybody else is just all the way out here to get out in the middle of nowhere?" And Bill, and he says, "Normal."
He's a champion. Awesome. By the way, there's an interview with Bill Belcourt on Gavin's podcast. Check out cloudbasemayhem.com and check out that podcast. That's a really good one. Is that Chris there?
That's me.
All right, brother. So we're stoked. We have Chris with us. Chris Santacroce is a pilot that's been flying since he was 16 years old. He started flying back in 1992. He became a Red Bull athlete, traveling all over the world. Has done many competitions, was one of the top 10 pilots in the world, from what I understand, for many years. I want to say in 10 years, one of the top cross-country pilots, if I want to get that right. You fly everything from airplanes to powered and unpowered hang gliders, paragliders, paramotors. You've got hundreds of skydives, base jumps, and you've even been known to fly wingsuits every once in a while. Really appreciate you coming on. I know it was kind of new. We're all doing something different with this live streaming, and so I'm really excited to have you on. And we'll just dig right in. Well, if you're ready, I'll let it rip.
Sounds great. Let's do it.
All right. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, and this is what I believe is one of the most consistent things I've heard about you, is that you started a project called Project Airtime, where you're flying handicap or people that are in wheelchairs and taking them on this adventure where normally they wouldn't be able to. And I put a link in the description so you can get to that, so you can support that, check that out. But I just wanted you to open up and talk about that and where it came from and where you're headed with it.
You bet. So the backstory is that around 15 years ago, we started taking people who had MS for tandem flights. And when we did it, it was a little bit of a stunt at that point, because we would have to take them out of their wheelchair and take them for this flight and then deliver them back to the wheelchair. And it was tricky. And we didn't like the idea of them skidding in or it being any kind of rough and tumble experience. And so we did it in perfect conditions with really good candidates, and it worked out great. But we couldn't do it all the time. And over the course of time, they started to develop these chairs, these adaptive chairs, which you've probably seen. And that we can do the flights in a lot more conditions. We started doing this 4 or 5 years ago, and we've been going great guns ever since. So we do about 60 flights a year with disabled people. And then we also do another 20 or 30 with family and caregivers. To us, that's really important as well. So it's been very rewarding work, and it seems to be a little bit busier every year. We have more and more people flying with us, and we have more and more solo pilots as time goes on. So we have uh, 6 or 7 guys that just sort of come and fly with us off and on throughout the year. We give out a scholarship or 3 where people just apply, and then we check out the applicants and we invite them to come, and we take care of everything, including lodging and transportation on the ground, and we take care of their caregivers. That's the story on Project Airtime, and hopefully it just gets bigger and bigger.
That is fantastic.
Robert, I'm going to jump in. Chris, can you make sure that you got plenty of light on your face and that your mouth is a little closer to the mic, or you're yelling a little bit? I know you're a nice, soft-spoken, polite dude. Just need to
all right, you got
get
it.
These guys hearing it.
Yep, totally.
So, I love it. That's so cool that you're able to use your phone. I didn't even know you could do it. I guess Kyle O was doing it when we went through the test run, but then he got on his computer. So that's super cool, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. So my next question, I want to just talk about the stoke factor. You've done some extreme things. I mean, the wingsuit, and I'll just share with you real quick. Personally, when I first saw people base jumping with the wingsuit, I was so emotional about it. I literally was about to cry. I wanted to do it so bad. And so I haven't done it. Maybe someday I will. But where do you go from here? I mean, you've accomplished some pretty big things, and talk about your plans and with family involved in all the different dimensions now, and how does that affect your flying?
Yeah, so it's a good question. What is the next level? And it's a little bit unclear for me, but it's been a great ride, and it was characterized, a number of years ago by just going great guns and doing every single thing that we possibly could, and the crazier the better. And these days we dial it back a little bit. In general, we try to, give it a solid 75%, as we say, and then act like we're giving 100. But the history has shown us that cruising out there and giving 125% all the time is a little bit dangerous. So,
yeah.
I've always been about teaching. So for me, it's not really about what I can do. It's more about what I can do to help people to achieve their dreams. I can't imagine that ever changing. Project Airtime for me is huge, so I can only imagine that we'll do more and more of that. There are some nether level things that we'll do with Project Airtime that'll happen in the next year. We'll be flying with motors so that we can do the flights in more places. We'll also be towing a little bit more with the chairs. So I know a lot more Project Airtime stuff. Apart from that, I don't have any big pie in the sky stuff. But as we know, this stuff sort of sneaks up on you. And, I never thought I would be a base jumper. And then I hung out around it enough. All of a sudden, I was one. And so you never know what's going to happen.
That's fantastic. So if it's okay to mention your son, I stumbled across some of his videos and some of the adventures. Let me see if I can get this to work here. There we go. Are you going to let him fly? What's the plan with him? I know you talked about a little bit about on Gavin's. The reason I ask is because I have 5 kids.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. My kids come around and kite with supervision. We know with me holding on, they will do it in some wind. And so they'll be kind of hovering on the edge of the hill, but they never really go out of arm's reach.
Right.
And that's kind of about as far as it goes. My son has had some training hill flights. And I think that something special would have to happen for them to transcend to the level of actually flying on their own. Something that would be a big, big change from what's currently going on. They are not quite ready for it. So I would have to say that they're going to have to be some kind of amazing ground handlers in order to go fly on their own. They would have to have some really compelling reasons that they could explain to me why they actually want to fly.
Yeah.
They would have to have done a bunch of tandems where they did all the flying and demonstrate some really good judgment. They can ride motorcycles now and they can ski, so I can see them navigating in several dimensions and making choices and anticipating what's about to happen next. And so, I mean, that's all the right stuff, but to fly off the hill, it really, people need to be around 15, it seems to me, and they need to understand the risk that they're taking, like really understand it. And ultimately, for all of us, but especially for the kids, you know, this flying stuff is fun, but it, along with other risk heavy sort of activities, it stands to get in the way of other things that we could be doing with our lives down the road. And so it's a big choice. And
I mean, when you
you
started,
have to be grown up to do that.
You at one point bought an RV. You were still in school, lived in the RV, so you could be close to the flying site, right?
Yeah, that's true. I was about 17 when that started. Yeah.
That's great. Well, Chris, if you want to, I think you were going to go log on from your computer. You're welcome to do that, so you don't have to stand out front. I'm sure it's cold out there too.
Actually, you know, if it's okay for the quality, I'm going to stay here. It turns out that I don't actually have my keys, so
darn it.
It's fine. You know, if it's working for you, it's working for me.
That is great. Well, let's move along then, so you're not out there freezing.
No worries.
You have some excellent information as far as piloting under brake pressure and not brake pressure. We have this article that you wrote just recently. I don't have it pulled up here, but you had talked. I read the entire article. We're discussing when you're on full speed bar, you're flying, and if you'll talk about that. And I also have Phil Russman here, who was the one that mentioned, hey, I should really take a peek at that and just talk about that for a minute.
Sure. So the backstory is, you know, I've basically spent my life teaching people how to feel just the right amount of brake at just the right time. By most accounts, it's the most important subject that any of us ever talk about with regard to our flying. It'll affect our performance, but more importantly, it affects our safety. And, you know, it's pretty much understood that that's what an instructor does, is we teach our people to feel the glider in just the right way. So, you know, lately there has been, well, take a step back. This is not an easy notion to teach. Somehow it ends up being a bit counterintuitive, and student types, they tend to let off the brakes. And you've heard the anecdote already, but I'll say it again. If you put 100 skydivers and 100 paragliders and 100 fixed wing, paramotor pilots in a room, and you ask them, hey, who thinks if you land in a rotor, you should let off the brakes and let it fly fast? You will get roughly 60% to raise their hand.
Right.
And the other 40% will be the educated ones, and they'll say something like, no, when you land in the rotor, you have to make sure to feel the brakes and make sure it doesn't deflate, and that's how we do it. And so, you know, the majority of the flying population, especially if you include the beginners and all the skydivers and all the paramotors, they just don't get that notion. So,
well, Chris,
yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I think that the number is far greater than 60%. Yeah. I would say it's closer to 80%.
Yeah, well, okay, so I'm being generous. But, you know, so it's okay. And what we do is we just hit this from every angle in the world. We have it in the syllabus. We have it in video. We teach it all day long. It's the reason why I have a job, is because people don't understand that, and it takes away from their flying, and they come around and we help them with that. And they're they're quite thrilled when they find out, and it really has far-reaching benefits for their flying. So everything's quite good, and that's our work. And what's happened lately is that there's been a little bit of a fashion of letting off the brakes in general, because the gliders will tolerate it, and because in some scenarios, particularly when you're gliding, it can really change your outcomes to have a nice clean glider and to engage some speed. And the gliders are such that they do give reasonable feedback even when you're on the speed and even when you're hands up. And we can now tune into the glider via the rear risers, and it's a dream. But it doesn't excuse us from the fact that when we're not gliding, that when we're taking off, that when we're flying in turbulence, or when we're coming to land somewhere that's turbulent in general, well, then we have to rely on our ability to manage the brakes, to add and subtract brakes in a sort of diligent way, and that our safety and basically keeping the glider open depends on it. So I am just doing my part to work against the current fashion, which is to talk all about how cool it is to let off and how cool it is to hit the speed bar. And I acknowledge fully that the gliders tolerate it a lot better these days, but at the very same time, I really think that the bulk of the flying population doesn't really even need to hear that, and it won't really affect them, and it doesn't pertain to them.
Phil, is there anything that you want to add to that?
Well, I think Chris hit the nail on the head, and we could drill into it further. But I think that the word needs to get out there to the 80% or so, and needs to get out there in a way that they're gonna start to see the light.
So, Chris, as an instructor, what's the most common mistakes that you're seeing from guys that are a P2? And then I'll ask the same question about P3 and then P4, if I could give in a generality. What are you seeing with guys, the most common mistakes that you're having to deal with time and time again? They come to you and it's like, I've got to deal with this again. And if you'll talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in general, your P2s, depending on their level of training, they can have any number of sort of pitfalls. But generally, most P2s are a little on the undertrained side and the undereducated side. And so, apart from the feeling the brakes subject and them realizing just how important it is for them to be diligent on the brakes, then it would probably be generally not flying in defensive enough fashion. Not thinking through and or knowing their emergency procedures and not knowing how they apply on a daily basis. So I think the best anecdote sort of story is anyone who's ever soloed an airplane knows that by the time you're getting ready to solo, then the top 5 or 7 things that can happen in the airplane that represent emergencies. So it would be smoke in the cockpit, or the engine dies, or engine failure on takeoff, or lost communication, and the list goes on. And you don't get to really go play at all until you are hip on all of those subjects. And in an airplane, you grab the checklist and you have to be able to run through the checklist with confidence. But in paragliders, there are, again, 5, 7, 10 major emergencies that can pop up. And I think that the average P2 doesn't know what those emergencies are, doesn't know what the proper responses are, and doesn't know how to anticipate them in their daily flying environment. So to me, that's the biggest work that we have with our new P2 pilots, is just making sure that they end up with what many of us perceive to be the minimal education.
Okay. And so,
Robert, let me jump in there. We got a question that someone had that I also have is, Chris, can you talk about, it's good to see you again. Can you talk about how you would practice figuring out that brake pressure, right? As I'm a 50-hour pilot, I'd love to have some way to think about, like, hey, how do I think about this? Does it go down to ears and shoulders? And how do you teach that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, number one, it's darn good to see you too. And I didn't know you were going to be on here. So this is a great surprise. You're one of my favorite people that I've met in the last year, and I really like your style. And so anybody who's watching this, make sure you link up with that guy, because he's super cool. This threesome here is rock solid, but Nick, I mean, that is awesome.
Nick Hawks.
Yeah, buddy. So Nick, good question, and quick, easy answer on that one. Our job, the P2 pilot's job, is to add and subtract brake, starting at the what I call normal brake pressure, like the minimum amount of brake pressure that it's okay to cruise around with, and then dipping down to what I call maximum brake for turbulence. So maximum brake for turbulence is the most brake that you would apply for a given moment to prevent a deflation before returning to normal brake. So the best work that a P2 can do is to work with an instructor to identify those two spots, and then slowly migrate back and forth between those two spots every single flight. Now, I'm not saying that you need to do it in such a dramatic way that you're ending up with pitch oscillations. That's not it at all. No one should actually see you doing this work. Rather, you would be doing this addition and subtraction of brake in sort of a sneaky way, and sort of a way that no one would actually notice what you're doing. And so my theory on that is that if you're doing that, then in time of need, then your hands will know exactly where to go, and exactly how quickly to go there, and then how quickly to move around from those points.
Dig it. Hey, Phil, I saw you smiling a little bit during that, kind of like the sneaky part. Can you talk a little bit about whatever you're thinking when it comes to brakes? Because I know both of you guys have tons of teaching experience. I'd like to get both perspectives.
So many things to talk about. And well, I guess since Chris is doing such a good job of talking about technique, maybe I'll talk about the politics just a little bit, and say that I think that there are many instructors, I sense, that are reluctant to tell people to pull the brakes because it's a responsibility. What do you think about that, Chris?
So you think that most instructors are hesitant to tell people to pull brake because they're afraid they'll pull too much?
Yes.
Got it. Yeah. So I mean, it's a good point. When I conduct maneuvers training, people show up and I say, hey, how much brake do you think you should be cruising around with? And they show me a brake setting, and we go from there. And then I say, hey, how much brake do you think you could pull for a moment to prevent a deflation if the air was really kicking your butt? And show me, and they show me that brake setting. And by and large, they're a little light on the brakes. And so that tells me that you're correct, Phil, that the average instructor is not comfortable coaching the student to go that deep. And I'm not saying that it's a particularly deep setting. I'm just saying for a lot of people, they're actually not in contact, and they're not pulling enough brake to even be connected with the glider. So, it's getting better for sure. We have all varieties of instructors all throughout the country and the world. And over the course of time, there are just more and more guys who are more and more savvy. And when I give people that sort of pop quiz about how much brake they should pull, by and large, people are doing better and better by the day. So hopefully, the flying world's a better and better place over the course of time. For sure, we can't have this conversation without pointing to the idea that some people will tend to pull too much. And that's not good. But I think I've identified the people that really have the biggest problems with that. They're the people who fly with their arms really far out. They're the people who have really bad flying posture, like spread eagle. They're the people who swing a hammer for a living, or do some kind of manual labor, people who go to the gym a lot. All these people can quite quickly, quite easily pull through the respective walls of pressure that the glider presents, and they can basically ignore and not feel the feedback that the glider gives the pilot as they go through the various brake settings. And so
especially in a stressful situation.
Right, exactly. They'll just go right through the wall of pressure. Now, even though you tell them and you remind them that they're testing for that wall of pressure every time they flare or when they kite, still, when things go bad, then these are the people that really overdo it. I will point out that I've given up on trying to identify 100% who is going to overreact and who's going to underreact. Years of maneuvers coaching have taught me that I can have my best guess as to whether a person will be one or the other, based on their build or based on their temperament. And taking a large number of people to the lake and putting them in adverse situations has taught me that the only way to know is to put yourself in an adverse situation. In other words, the only way to know is to do the maneuvers training. And then you find out if you're an underreactor or an overreactor, and you find out lots of other things about yourself as well.
I'm laughing because I experienced a pretty crazy event. I think I came up on some wind shear. We were at Palomar, if you're familiar with the site, and completely overreacted. Was heavy on my brakes. Went into a face down spiral for the first time. Have not done an SIV yet. I was really pressing hard to get. I'm just trying to fly with Phil and these guys that are years and years under their belt, and they try to talk me down sometimes, and I'm like, nah, I'm gonna fly and let's just do this. And for the most part, I was self-taught in the beginning and just gun-ho. But I had found this place where it was like a humbling experience, and what it did is it kind of pushed me into this kind of fear place. And so I want to turn this question, if I can, fear management. You had an accident some years ago on a paramotor. Your wing touched the ground, got caught in some bushes, sent you kind of in a whack landing, and you injured your spine. You were paralyzed for a time. And I'll save the time because I know it's freezing. It's literally 35 degrees where you're at, Chris.
Don't worry about me, buddy.
The managing the fear after that, it has changed my perspective a bit on my flying. Of course, the weather conditions have sucked here lately, but how do you conduct business now in your personal piloting experience after, and how do you mitigate the fear?
Right, great question. So it turns out that realizing that you are capable of miscalculating, realizing that you as a pilot, and when I say you, I mean you and me and all of us, realizing that screwing up is not somebody else's problem, that it's also potentially your problem at any given moment, is a great, and if not the great, coming of age moment for any pilot. So if you're watching this and you have never screwed up, and if you have never had something bad or random sneak up on you or happen to you, for example, RC flying into your lines or into you, right, Phil?
Right.
Yeah. If you have never had that experience, then it's waiting for you, and it would be really.
You're still there, Chris. Might have lost.
You still have my audio, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So if you've never had that experience, then after it does happen to you, then you will be a different person, and your flying will proceed, and you will be able to proceed in a way that's a lot better and a lot safer. And so wait for that moment. Hopefully you don't have to experience it, but after it happens, then you will proceed with a lot more sort of savvy and with a lot healthier attitude than you currently have. So it sounds like you've had that experience. I know Phil has had that experience. He's probably been flying for 40 years, so he's probably had several or many. Nick, I don't know. I think maybe you came to maneuvers with that, some sort of stories under your belt. And
a little bit of fear. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would just say when people come to me and they tell me that, or when something happens and they have a sort of what I call free or cheap lesson, meaning no long-term repercussions, I'm so happy for them. To me, that's the best way and the only way to fly. So, yeah, I think flying with a little bit of trepidation is great. And we all sort of go through ups and downs in our overall flying vibe, our overall flying mindset. And there are times when we're all really dangerous, and other times when we're a lot better off. And it can be sort of akin to being in a fender bender. Most people have been in some sort of small fender bender one point in their life. And what they know about it is that after you have that fender bender, then you drive really carefully for a while. So I know you're rolling your video there of your event. I would love to see that.
Yeah, it's probably kind of choppy.
Yeah. Oh, choppy, right. But that one would be a fun one to talk about for sure. If we ever get the chance. I remember looking at the video, and I remember I had some feedback for you, but I don't remember what it was.
Oh, wow. Yeah, lighter in the brakes. Phil has been very kind, and we literally spent about an hour going frame by frame and talking about that. I always try to fly with Phil now. It's it's a privilege that we have to live in Southern California, to have Phil around, and I harass him and text him and call him, and you just got to do that.
Love it. Well, I tell you, that would be one of my big subjects, and that would be that having a strong flying community and or strong flying friends that help you to stay out of trouble is absolutely the best asset that you could have. And that's what we sell to our students that join in our program. And that's what happens in all the areas where the flying communities are successful, is that there's that camaraderie and that brotherhood.
Speaking of, I want to put a plug in for that. If you're interested in getting some really incredible schooling, and from what I've heard from across the board, the best school to learn, superflyinc.com. You can check out Chris's school. They do SIVs, tows. He'll even teach paramotoring, I believe hang gliding as well. If I'm forgetting anything else, he's a teacher of all things flying. Check out, I put in the link of this live feed, the links to these 3 websites. He also has an app that they created, and he spent quite a bit of time and money creating this safety app. It's called pilotaware.com. Go and check that out. This is something that you can add to your repertoire of flying, and that'll definitely help you. I'm going to go and download it as soon as I can figure out how to do it. I just need to sit down and look at it. I didn't get a chance to do it today. I was going to try to talk about it, but I ran out of time. ProjectAirtime.com is the organization. If you want to go there, support them. I highly encourage you to do that. Some of the things that they're doing, that's the most rad thing that I can think of. Just the fact that you take people up tandems that would more than likely never be able to paraglide. Real quick plug also, if you're interested in seeing more interviews like this, please subscribe to the channel and subscribe to our email list. I'll send out an email ahead of the shows, and we'll ask if you have questions or comments that you want to ask ahead of a show, you can respond to that email. And also want to encourage you, we don't charge for the show, but we would like to take it somewhere. If you can help us financially, you can do that at Patreon, at the website, which is paraglidingtalk.com. And so with that, I just have one other question for you, Chris. At what point do you think a pilot's ready for an SIV? P2, P3?
Yeah, it's a good question. I got to tell you that SIV is a funny acronym for me. Number one, it's a French thing. And I can't think of another instance where we borrow an acronym for the French to describe something so awesome. And I have to tell you that it's also difficult if I tell my kids that I'm going to coach an SIV clinic, because then when they tell their friends about it, their friends are like, HIV clinic? And so, or they say, oh, your dad has something to do with SUVs? And so I like to call it maneuvers, and I like to think of it as essential emergency training. And
I like that.
Yeah. And we will take people to the lake when they're in their first week of flying, and we have them do riser twist and stabilo pulls and A tweaking and pitch movement and speed system and big ears and all the combinations and brake flapping and circle drills and turns back and forth. And, they may even do beeline stalls if they get a handful of toes. So, it's an interesting thing when they do that as a part of their initial training. It's just as new as everything else to them. And for sure, they don't remember it as well, but on a conscious level, but their body remembers it, and um, their body remembers how to do the recoveries, and their blood pressure gets lower and lower every time that they do a frontal, or every time they do an asymmetric. And in keeping with that, if they ever have a frontal or an asymmetric in combat, then they're going to be very low blood pressure about the whole thing in general. So my answer to your question is everybody should do essential maneuvers training immediately, as soon as possible. And, by and large, the feedback that I get from the training is, number one, that was way more mellow than I thought. Number two, I can't believe I didn't do that sooner. Number three, I'm going to do that every year. And then number four, everyone should do that. So I really feel like that is accurate. The only other feedback that I get from the maneuvers training that's interesting is I will have people say that of all the stuff that we do, that the most interesting stuff of all is the turning drills and the emphasis on posture. So people will go and do big asymmetrics, big frontals, and the list goes on. And the feedback we get in the end is, that was great, but I got to tell you, the stuff that you helped me with regard to turning, because it's a very fine art, turning is, and also the stuff about posture, because that's, again, another very fine art with far-reaching benefits. Those are the things that people like the most.
Wow, that is even more than I expected. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm eating steak right now as we speak.
Robert, let me jump in on that. Chris, yeah. I want to make sure I clarify. When you say circles and turns, I know in the past that those have been kind of alternate with the spirals and wing overs. Were you talking about one or the other, or is there a reason that you're not using those?
Yeah. So the deal is there is no wing overometer or spiralometer in our business. And there's no way to quantify when we transcend from one to the other. So I always refer to them as those two things, turns back and forth and wing overs, two fundamental elements of flight. And for sure, at some point, it transcends into what the average person would consider to be wing overs and spirals, all of our spirals being asymmetric spirals, the kind that are oblong and not characterized by hard round turns. But yeah, when I say that, I'm speaking loosely about that dynamic. And as to the intensity level, varies for each person, and as a big sliding scale, it's tough to calibrate.
Great info. Yeah. One more question. Oh, Phil, you got something?
Well, I was just going to say, I did a maneuvers clinic with a maneuvers throwdown session with, and it was absolutely fantastic, and it changed my flying. And the thing is, all the top comments that Chris said that he gets are totally true. And not because, oh gosh, I went flying today and I had a frontal and 3 asymmetrics. Nothing happened, and all the flying was normal, but I'm flying way, way better, even though I wasn't collapsing my wing. The normal flying, the wing open flying, is so much better once you've done this session with Chris, and or whoever you can do it with. But I certainly recommend Chris.
So as we wrap up, what advice do you have for the new pilot that's wanting to fly for a lifetime?
Yeah, I mean, my standard earful is that if you ever started to get ambitious about your flying, like if you started to set goals, I really want to do this year and that next year, and I want my flying to be X, Y, or Z maneuvers or cross country or adventure flying or whatever, is just let it go. That having an agenda about your flying is like having an agenda about your driving. Nobody walks around and says, hey, check out what I'm going to achieve this year in my driving. I'm going to be the best driver, and I want to do some really interesting stuff, and I'm going to really take it to the next level. When it comes to driving, all we try to do is keep the car between the ditches, rubber side down, and not run anybody over and not get hit. And that's exactly how we should proceed as paraglider pilots, as pilots of anything. The only test is if you are going to be in one piece at the very end, when you hand the paraglider back to your children and say, guys, I'm too old to do this. My vision's too bad. I've had my fun. That's the only time you're going to be able to claim great pilot. And I'll give a shout out to my buddy, actually, Bruce Arian. He died this year. Great guy. He died of cancer. He was Phil, I think you know him maybe. He was a helicopter pilot. He was in Vietnam. He was on the air as a news helicopter pilot. He flew live flights. At the end of his career, he flew paramotors. He went paragliding all over the world. He never screwed up. He never took anybody out. He never balled up any aircraft. In the very end, he had medical problems, but he gave back the helicopter and he said, guys, I'm done. And he got rid of the paramotor. He said, guys, I'm done. And he was an excellent pilot. And that's how I want my story to go. And I think everyone should do the same.
Well said. I love it.
I think if you are going to have an agenda, the agenda should be about having a good attitude. And I think that's, remaining calm, and just being with who you are and what's happening at the moment. Just not, the agenda should be not having an agenda.
Nice.
Well said. Chris, thank you so much for coming on, man. We're going to just cut it short here. Really appreciate you, your input. I'll just give this shout out. I invited Gavin to come on tonight, and he had some family in from out of town, so he couldn't join us. But just like I invited him, I'll invite you if you see a show that you want to chime in. I'll send you the invite ahead of the show. You're welcome to come on anytime that we're live. And so far, we're doing this on Thursday nights. We'll see where it goes. And really appreciate you.
I really appreciate what you're doing here. This seems like quite a positive move. I'm sure that it's going to really get a lot of traction here in the coming months. And I'll spread the word on my end. And thanks, Phil, and thanks, Nick. And this was fun. And I really apologize about the bad audio and about the circumstances regarding me standing outside my office. But
no, it's good, man.
I was knee deep in a project, helping one of our guys who's in a wheelchair to fix his car. And I was at Harbor Freight, and it all shook down in a hurry. And here I am at my office with no keys. But that's just how it goes. It worked out great.
All right, Chris. Thank you so much, man. Have a great night. So appreciate everybody that's watching and listening. Make sure you go check out Chris Santacroce's websites, the superflyinc.com, pilotaware.com. Get the app. Also projectairtime.com, his organization, and those are in the links. Those links are in the description. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you can see these coming up, and give us your email so that we can send you out the details. And I'm thinking maybe if we get enough revenue coming in and people are already donating quite a bit, we'll give away some prizes and do some stuff to where we can help some people out and get some people off the ground. Really appreciate everyone tonight. Thanks for stopping in. Don't forget to go to paraglidingtalk.com and get on the list. Have a great night, everybody. Appreciate you.
Ciao.
Good night.
All right.